I've been getting back into Modern, and one of the decks that I usually pick up whenever I get back into this format is a Rakdos deck, more like a Rakdos aggro style deck. I just love the colors. I love the black aspect where you're like in people's hands, you're destroying other creatures, and then the red part where you're playing like a lot of fast creatures or dealing some additional damage through burn. I just think it's a lot of fun. This is a similar deck that I've been on and off with for a few years. And since I'm getting back into the game, this deck might need a little bit improvement. However, for under like $50 right now, I think this could be a really good fun starting point. And I get a lot of people aren't into all this competitive stuff and spending a lot of money, so I think this fits a certain type of niche of people. So this deck is kind of built for somebody who just wants to swing in a lot for damage, use their graveyard to cheat out some kind of cheeky creatures, and kind of just burn and destroy everything your opponent has. This deck is pretty reliant on the graveyard, which is a huge weakness, as there is a lot of graveyard hate out there. However, there's a lot of cards that really facilitate getting things into the graveyard, and Faithless Looting did get recently unbanned, and this was an insane card. For 1 mana, you draw 2 cards and discard 2. And it has flashback, but this is really good because it fills your graveyard but also gets you 2 better cards in your hand that you might want to use. Just overall really good card. I'm kind of surprised this is still like $1. Like, I know it's a common card, but it's a really powerful card. That's why it was banned to begin with. Now that it's unbanned, having a deck like this Rakdos style deck that kind of abuses our graveyard to cheat creatures out makes it even better. As a reminder though, you're probably not going to win like a Grand Prix or go 5-0 at your locals every single week using a deck like this. However, through some more upgrades and things like that in the future, if you do want to do that with this deck, then you probably increase those odds and probability. And you want to build a deck that's, I would say, quite good and uses a lot of cards in the metagame or the modern metagame. And for like under $50, I think it's pretty solid. The bad thing though is it's $40 like online if you want to play this, on MTG Go. And the main culprit here is the Mishra's Bauble. That's like over half of the cost. So, and you kind of need it in the deck. If I were to play Magic the Gathering online with this deck, I would probably not buy these just because that's a lot of money. I'll wait for it to go down. But everything else is quite affordable within the deck. Getting into the deck, we'll go through the creatures first, and we'll go to spells and everything like that. But I want to point out like 1 or 2 really important cards in this deck, and that is Unearth and Call of the Death Dweller. So Unearth is 1 black, return target creature with mana value 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. It does have cycling as well, but this is such a powerful card in this deck, allowing us to cheat out any of our creatures that we want. And I know it is a card, or you get to pick a creature with 3 or less. However, it's 1 mana. Like, you get to get a lot of value out of that, and you get some selection as well because we do mill cards into the graveyard. Call of the Death Dweller is a lot more powerful of a card, but it is 3 mana. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total converted mana cost 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Then you get to put a Death Touch counter on one, and then a Menace counter on the other. So if you play this card, you can pick something like Dragon Channeler and like Bloodghast, or Dragon Channeler, Stitcher Supply, and like this other card, or you could play a Lightning Skelemental. You got options as long as the converted mana cost is 3 or less. But a really fun card. But again, it is 3 mana, and this deck does run not a lot of lands because we're not playing a lot of things with a lot of mana value. But essentially, we're feeding our graveyard, and then we're playing pretty spicy creatures, trying to get them out quickly, and we want to end this game quick. Starting off with the first creature, you need 4 of these. This is like $1 each, but this card is so good, and it's been in the metagame quite a while as well. Dragon's Rage Channeler. Whenever you cast a spell, you get to surveil, so you get to look at the top card of your library, and you get to put that card in a graveyard if you want to. If you have Delirium, as long as there are 4 more card types in your graveyard, this thing gets +2/+2 flying and must attack each combat if able. So for 1 mana, it's essentially a 3/3 with flying. You're attacking every single turn because you should have Delirium. Maybe not all the time, but with the amount of mill that we have, it should be quite easy. So to get those card types though, this deck's got creatures, it's got instances, sorceries, artifacts, and lands, and we also added one of these, a Tarfire. This is actually a tribal card. Wanted to throw one of these in the deck just to get some extra, like an extra card just for Delirium, and it's just fitting for the deck. We'll get there in a second though, but we do have a lot of cards that can get that Delirium easily. We could also add like 1 or 2 Planeswalkers too, but I think we have enough cards that can get there. Stitcher Supply is a 1 mana 1/1, enters the battlefield or dies, you get to mill 3 cards. Really good at filling the graveyard up, but I didn't want to overdo with this card because when it enters and dies, you get the mill 3. That's a lot. And this card is only a 1/1, so it doesn't do anything else, you know? So I think 2 of them is okay. There are some strategies that probably want to run 4, but again, it's going to depend. You can always mix and match the ratios of cards and creatures you want. So if you think this is more fitting for your strategy, definitely throw it in. Don't just completely copy this build, because there are some design choices, you know, that I selected. Voldarian, not Epicure, however you pronounce this. 1 mana, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and then you create a blood token. It's an artifact with pay 1, tap it, discard a card, and then sacrifice this token, then you get to draw a card. This card's pretty good because it gets you a body on the board. It deals a free point of damage, and then it even gives you the option to like draw another card and get something in your graveyard that you might not need. I think 3 of them is okay, maybe even 2. If this had like a more power or toughness, I think that'd be a little bit different, but because it's only a 1 mana 1/1, I didn't think I needed 4 of them. Bloodghast is a pivotal card in this deck, and look at this, it's like almost $1.50 maybe. This card used to be like 20 bucks, and they kept reprinting it, I guess. I don't really love the artwork of this, and that's probably why this card is a little bit cheaper. This version of the art is definitely the cheapest, but this card is so good in a deck like this. So it's 2 mana, but you're never paying the mana cost. Let's just get that straight. It's a 2/1. It can't block anything. And this has haste as long as your opponent has 10 or less life. The best part is it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, you may return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So as long as you're filling up your graveyard with these boys and you're playing a land, all of the Bloodghast get put on the battlefield for free. Now, again, the important part though is this deck isn't running any fetch lands, and fetch lands really make Bloodghast even better. So that is one thing really lacking in this deck is the fetches, but they are a little bit, I guess, more pricey. So that is why we're leaving them out. The obvious choice here would be a Bloodstained Mire, which actually you can get for like 12 bucks, which is actually relatively cheap. I think I got mine for like 20-30 bucks a while ago. So again, it just depends what you want, but if you like the deck a lot, then definitely Bloodstained Mire would be a huge improvement to this deck, again, because Bloodghast's landfall ability. Next up, I have 1 Dreadhorde Arcanist. This is a 2 mana 1/3 with trample. Whenever it attacks, you may cast an instant or sorcery card with a mana value less than or equal to this card's power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then you have to exile it. So every time you attack with this card, as long as it's gonna always have one power, because there's nothing in the deck that's gonna buff it. But if it had 2 or 3, you get to pick mana cost or cards with mana costs of its power or less. But again, for this deck, it's always going to be 1. So every time this card attacks, we can recast something like Faith is Looting, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt, you know, all of our 1 mana spells for free. Then we have to exile it. Really cool card. It's not, the deck isn't over reliant on it, I would say. This is a card that I didn't design this deck to be over reliant on it. The card seems like absolutely busted, which again, it is good, but it has to attack to get that trigger. You have to have a card that you want to hit in the graveyard, and like it just requires a little bit of setup, and it costs 2 mana. It's not as explosive as I think it comes off to be. However, again, it's still really good, but there are reasons why a lot of other decks in the metagame don't play this card. And that's just because there's a lot of more powerful things. If it entered the battlefield and then you could do that trigger, or enter the battlefield and attacked, it'd be completely different. Also, if you have like a couple of these cards and you are attacking on the field, you just run into a situation where you may run out of cards in your graveyard, or you might not be getting the type of advantage you think you are. I think 1 or 2 in the deck is fine. I think that's fitting. But yeah, anyway. Next one is Croxa. This card dropped a lot in price, and it's so good. For 2 mana, it's a 6/6, but technically it's not. So when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless it escapes. And if you cast it from your hand, it's not going to escape. So essentially when you cast it for the first time, you're just going to get this effect. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card loses 3 life. It's kind of like an overglorified lightning bolt with a discard. However, when it's in your graveyard, you can pay 4 mana and escape. This is when you exile 5 other cards from your graveyard, and then you get to put this bad boy on the field. Also, you get when it enters the battlefield, you get the trigger where the opponent discards and then loses life, and then every time it attacks, you also get that effect. Really cool card, and it works best when it's already in the graveyard, but also casting from the hand isn't the worst thing either. I think the deck could probably run 2 of these. It is a legendary creature, that is one thing to keep in mind, so I think more than 2 in the deck's probably not ideal, but 1 or 2 I think is definitely probably the best. Like, yeah, 3 of them is way too many. But you get this in your graveyard, you get to cast it, and you can easily exile a lot of other cards. You do need to pay 4 mana though, which is, yeah, that is probably the worst part of this, as again, this deck does not run a lot of lands. So one in the graveyard is probably fine. One of my favorite cards, this card's so fun. Lightning Skelemental, 1 black, 2 red, 6/1, trample haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. But then you have to sacrifice it at the end step. This is a Blightning creature. If you know what the card Blightning is, it's a 3 mana, deal 3 damage, and then your opponent discards 2 cards. Really fun card, but this is just Blightning on a stick, and essentially, this is one of the main targets we're going to be using to cheat out with our Unearth, because then it becomes a 1 mana 6/1. Really good, and if it connects, it doesn't need to deal 6 damage to your opponent to deal the damage. It just needs to connect to your opponent, and it does have trample, so you really get in the surprise factor with this. Although your opponent could kind of play around it, predicting that you might have it, but if you do something like Faithless Looting right into Unearth, yeah, it's explosive. Getting into the spells, obviously, again, Faithless Looting, draw cards, discard, fill up our graveyard. It's just so good. Fatal Push is some removal. Same thing with Lightning Bolt. Again, just really good removal, but also part of the burn. We are going to want to try and get our opponent's life down quickly. We don't want to play a long game here. Tarfire, get that tribal instance or tribal card type in the graveyard. But yeah, deal 2 damage to target creature player. Just a little bit worse of Lightning Bolt, but it gives us, again, that tribal. Unearth, we already discussed this. That's how we get our creatures back for basically free. Unholy Heat, 1 mana, deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. However, if we have Delirium, we get to deal 6 damage instead. You could probably run more of this card. I think it's going to be dependent on the metagame and matchups you're anticipating on facing. That's when you're probably going to swap these between Unholy Heat and Fatal Push, and even like Terminate. Just the type of removal spells you're going to want in your deck is going to be dependent on the opponent you're going to be facing. Terminate, just 2 mana, deals destroy creature, instant speed. That's one thing I think some people forget too. Like, I think Feed the Swarm is a pretty good card in the metagame right now. But the problem with Feed the Swarm is it's not instant speed. And I mean, it does hit enchantments and stuff, but instant speed removal I think is very powerful. Then we already discussed this. This is a more expensive Unearth, but it's a whole lot better. Then we have Mishra's Bauble. 0 mana, we get to sacrifice this and look at the top card of a target player's library. Then we get to draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So we can do this to ourselves to essentially scry a card and see if we want that. This works better though if you have fetch lands, because then you can reshuffle the deck. But you can also look at your opponent's library or the top card of the library and kind of get a feel of what they have as well. So kind of picks what you want, but this is just a free card to get into our library. To get into our graveyard to get that Delirium that we need. Then for the lands, Blackcleave Cliffs, I can't believe this card is that cheap. You can buy 4 of them for like $8, so each one's like $2. I think I bought mine like before they had the reprints. I mean, this was like 5 years ago at this point, maybe more. This card was like almost $30, probably $40. It was crazy. But yeah, it's such a good card, especially for this deck. Definitely the best land. Yeah, ideally, you do probably want the fetch lands as well. And then running 1 more mountain as opposed to swamp, because the mountain is how we're going to be able to get our Faithless Looting, which could really help find our other swamps and stuff. That's kind of my thought process there. But I think 17 lands is the bare minimum. I think 16 is just a little bit too low. Maybe even 17 is a little low. But this deck operates off of very little mana. So for some sideboard options, again, this is going to be dependent on the matchups you're going to be facing. And these are just some cards I kind of threw together based on just some general thoughts that I have. Bloodchief's Thirst, I think, is a pretty decent card. It's a 1 mana sorcery though. Just destroy target creature planeswalker with 2 or less. So Fatal Push can't hit planeswalkers, but it is instant speed. But Bloodchief's Thirst can. Also, you can kick it, so you can destroy something. Actually, if you kick it for 4 mana, you can just destroy anything you want. creature or planeswalker. So that is a pretty good option, but that is a lot of mana too, which we might not be able to get to like efficiently. Cling to Dust is a good graveyard hate card that also gains you some life. So 1 mana instant speed, exile card from graveyard. If it's a creature, gain 3 life, or you get to draw a card. Then you can also escape it too and cast it again. We have Duress and Inquisition of Kozilek to some ways to interact with our opponent's hand. I really would like to main board cards like Inquisition and Duress, or even like Thoughtseize, obviously, but Thoughtseize is a little expensive, so it's not in this build. But the problem is, this deck wants to be fast, and in cards that we can see our opponent's hand, yeah, we can get in there and, you know, gain some intel and stuff, but at the end of the day, we would rather have something like a Lightning Bolt, or, you know, something to interact with our opponent's board and help our creatures push through, as opposed to, you know, looking at their hand and maybe getting something pivotal, you know. But that is also why we are running these in the sideboard, because we can exchange these for other cards in our main deck if our opponent's playing more of like a control build, or they're playing more of like a combo heavy deck. If they are doing that, maybe if we are anticipating more combo decks, you might want to run more of the Duresses. But again, if you have the option, Thoughtseize is just a better card. Meltdown's a cool card. I gotta pick up some of these. This seems like a newer card. For X and a red, we get destroy artifacts with mana value X or less. That is such a good artifact hate card. That is crazy, and especially, you know, there's some pretty artifact heavy decks in the game, especially like Tron too. Even if you pay 1 mana, you can hit some really powerful decks and, you know, destroy cards like Expedition Map. Nile Spellbomb, just some graveyard hate, and we get to pay black and draw cards. It's always going to be decks in the game that abuse their graveyard like our own, so keep that in mind. Fulminator Mage is a good Tron hate card, like Eldrazi Tron's pretty big right now. And the best part about this is it's 3 mana, so we can cast it with Unearth or Call of the Death Dweller. There's a part of me that really wants to main board 4 of these and just run like a land destruction kind of style deck, or at least have that like main deck for this deck, but it's just realistically not optimal. We can get a lot more value using other cards, but again, in the matchups, if you're expecting a lot of Tron, put these in the deck. Oof, gonna be spicy when you hit these in the graveyard and cast them for 1 mana. Then you're essentially getting a 1 mana destroy target land. You can also swing it for some damage too. Cool card. Kulagon's Command, just really versatile. It does cost 3 mana, so a little expensive, so I wouldn't run more than like 2 in the side deck or in the 75. Return, you can choose 2 of these. Return target creature from your graveyard to your hand, or your target player discards a card, or destroy target artifact, or you deal 2 damage to any target. Again, just really versatile, does a lot. Obsidian Charmaw is expensive, however it costs 1 less to cast for each land your opponent controls that could produce colorless. So this is really good for Tron. If they got their 3 lands up, this card costs 2 red. It's got flying, and it's a 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you could destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. What a Tron hate card. Yeah, really good. The bad thing though is this doesn't really work as well with the deck, as our Unearth and Call of the Death Dweller can't target it, so you have to draw into this. That is one option, to probably run Fulminator Mage as opposed to this card, just in the 75. But this is just such a powerful card. So again, you got to pick your tech, pick what you want to play with, but these are at least some good options. So yeah, so this deck utilizes our graveyard. We're cheating things out. We're swinging it for a lot of damage, just trying to win the game quickly using some red and black spells. Trying to limit what our opponent does by, you know, playing things like Fatal Push, Terminate, and Holy Heat. And I guess mostly Lightning Bolt because we got a lot, but really want to assemble our graveyard, and then gives us some options later in the game, or I guess later in the game, talking like turn 3 or 4, to play our very powerful cards and fill the graveyard up with blood gas and really swing it for damage. Anyway though, let me know down below what you thought. Hopefully enjoyed the video. We got a lot of other videos on the channel talking about playing Magic the Gathering on a budget. This game can definitely be a lot of fun without spending too much money. I mean, again, you're not going to win a Pro Tour, but you can still have a whole lot of fun. Take care, everybody.